The autumn wind swept through the small Pennsylvania town of Westfield, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. It was October 1944, and while the war raged across the Atlantic, this quiet corner of America seemed untouched by the chaos consuming Europe. The white church on Maple Street stood as it had for 100 years, its bell tower piercing the gray sky like a needle threading through cloth. James Whitmore stood at the base of that tower, his hands calloused from farm work, his eyes fixed on the narrow ladder leading up. He was 23, too young to have served in the First War, too old to avoid the draft for this one. But a shattered ankle from a childhood fall had marked him 4F, unfit for service. The injury had healed poorly, leaving him with a permanent limp that drew stares and whispers in town. Behind him, 3 men gathered near the church entrance. Tom Bradley, the butcher's son who'd come home missing his left arm at Monte Cassino. Frank Sullivan, who'd survived Normandy but lost something else, something that lived behind his eyes. And Pastor Gerald, who'd buried too many boys in the past 2 years. "James, what are you doing up there again?" Tom called out, his voice carrying a mixture of concern and irritation. "You spend more time in that tower than the pigeons do." James didn't turn around, just checking the sight lines, making sure everything's clear. "Clear for what?" Frank said flatly. "The Germans aren't coming to Westfield, Pennsylvania. This isn't France. This isn't Belgium. This is home." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Home. The place where James remained while others had gone to fight. The place where mothers looked at him with barely concealed resentment, wondering why their sons had died while the farmer's boy with the limp still walked the streets. Even his own father barely spoke to him anymore, the shame too heavy between them. "You don't understand," James said, finally turning to face them. His face was lean, weathered beyond his years, with eyes that held an intensity that made people uncomfortable. "I've been studying the manuals, learning trajectories, wind compensation, elevation adjustment. If I can't fight over there, I can at least prepare for if they come here." Tom shook his head slowly. "They're not coming here, James. And even if they were, what would you do? Limp down Main Street with your grandfather's hunting rifle?" The cruelty of the words made Pastor Gerald wince, but he said nothing. The truth often cut deeper than malice. James felt the familiar burn of shame creeping up his neck, but he forced himself to remain calm. "That rifle belonged to my grandfather, yes. He used it in the Great War. Before the limp, before the pity, before any of this, I could outshoot anyone in 3 counties. You remember, Tom? You were there at the county fair in '39. Tom's expression softened slightly. "That was 5 years ago, James. Things are different now." "What's different is that I've gotten better," James replied. "Every day I practice. Every calculation, every adjustment, every factor that goes into a long-range shot. I've read every military manual I could find, studied every technique. Distance, wind speed, temperature, elevation, even the rotation of the earth at extreme range." Frank laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "The rotation of the earth. You hear this, Pastor? The boy thinks he's going to calculate the Coriolis effect from a church bell tower in Pennsylvania." "It matters at distance," James said quietly. "At 500 yards, 600 yards, it matters." "You'll never take a shot like that," Frank said, stepping closer. "You'll never have to. And frankly, James, maybe that's a blessing. You don't know what it's like to look at another man through your sights and pull that trigger. You don't know what it does to you, what it costs." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken pain. Frank's hands trembled slightly, though whether from anger or memory, no one could say. Pastor Gerald finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "James, these men mean well. They've seen things none of us here can imagine. Perhaps it's time to accept that your service to this community takes a different form. You help with the harvests, you maintain the church grounds, you do good work. But it's not enough," James said, the words barely above a whisper. "It'll never be enough. Not when Mrs. Henderson crosses the street to avoid looking at me. Not when Sarah Miller won't even acknowledge me at the general store because her brother died at Anzio while I was here, safe, whole enough to walk around this town that treats me like a coward." "You're not a coward," Tom said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Then what am I? James asked, looking at each of them in turn. What am I if not the man who stayed behind? The question hung unanswered as the men dispersed, leaving James alone with his thoughts and the growing darkness. He climbed the tower anyway, ignoring the protest of his ankle on each wooden rung. The bell tower had become his sanctuary, the one place where his limitations didn't matter, where he could see the world from a different perspective. From the top, Westfield spread out below him like a miniature village. He could see the Henderson House, the general store, the train station where boys had departed with bands playing and flags waving. So many had left. So few had returned. James pulled out his notebook, worn and filled with calculations, wind charts, elevation tables. He'd taught himself trigonometry from library books, learned about atmospheric pressure and how it affected bullet trajectory. Every night, he'd practice with his grandfather's Springfield rifle, marking distances across the farmland, adjusting for conditions, perfecting his craft for a war that would never reach him. The mockery had started small. Whispers at first, then open comments. Bill Crawford, whose 3 sons all served, had confronted him outside the church 2 months ago. While my boys are dying in Europe, you're playing soldier in a bell tower. Real brave, Whitmore. Real patriotic. James had tried to explain, tried to make them understand, but words failed against the weight of grief and loss. The town needed someone to blame, someone to carry their anger and frustration. The crippled boy who couldn't serve became that target. The worst had been Sarah. They'd grown up together, had talked about marriage before the war. Her brother Robert had been James's best friend since childhood. When Robert died on that beach in Italy, something broke between them. She'd looked at James with eyes full of accusation and said words that still burned in his memory. Robert wanted you there with him. He said in his last letter that he wished his best friend could have fought beside him. But you're here, safe in your tower, while he's in the ground. James hadn't told her that Robert knew about the ankle, knew it wasn't a choice. He hadn't told her about the letters Robert had sent him, encouraging him to keep practicing, to stay sharp, telling him that skills matter wherever you are. Robert had understood. But Robert was gone, and the dead can't defend the living. 3 weeks ago, the breaking point came. Someone had painted a yellow stripe down the church tower steps. The symbolism was clear, cruel, unmistakable. Coward. Pastor Gerald had scrubbed it away before Sunday service, but the stain remained in everyone's minds. Tom and Frank had confronted the Johnson boys, the likely culprits, but the damage was done. The whole town knew. Even the children whispered and pointed when James walked by. Now, as twilight settled over Westfield, James made a decision. Tomorrow he would leave, pack what little he had and go west, somewhere his limp and his shame wouldn't follow him. James descended the tower as the first stars emerged. His mind settled on departure. He would tell Pastor Gerald in the morning, help finish the autumn harvest, then disappear like so many others who couldn't bear the weight of small-town judgment. But as his boots touched the church floor, he heard voices outside. Urgent, frightened voices cutting through the evening quiet. Pastor Gerald burst through the doors, his face pale in the lamplight. James, thank God you're still here. We need help. Real help. What happened? James asked, already moving toward the door despite his confusion. Outside, a crowd had gathered near the town square. In the center stood Major William Cooper of the British Army, his uniform dusty from travel, his accent thick and unmistakable. Beside him, 2 military policemen flanked a man in civilian clothes, whose eyes held the cold calculation of someone accustomed to violence. This is Otto Schneider, Major Cooper announced to the assembled townspeople. German intelligence officer. Escaped from a POW transport 3 days ago near Philadelphia. We've tracked him here to Westfield. He's armed, dangerous, and has already killed 2 guards. The crowd murmured, fear rippling through them like wind through wheat. Westfield had no police force beyond old Sheriff Mitchell, who'd been a deputy when Roosevelt was first elected. The nearest military base was 40 miles away. We believe he's hiding somewhere in town, waiting for darkness to move. Cooper continued. We've set up roadblocks, but we need spotters, people who know every building, every hiding place. He scanned the crowd, his eyes landing on James. "You there, the young man. I'm told you spend considerable time in that bell tower." James felt every eye turn toward him. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Frank's jaw tightened. The weight of their judgment pressed down like physical force. "I do, sir," James replied, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. "Can you see the entire town from up there? Every building, every street, every alley." Cooper studied him for a long moment, then noticed the limp as James stepped forward. "You're not enlisted." "Medical discharge before I could enlist, sir. Bad ankle." James waited for the familiar dismissal, the polite rejection that always followed this explanation. But Cooper nodded slowly. "Can you shoot?" "Yes, sir." "How well?" "At distance, I'm the best shot in this county. Maybe the best in 3 counties. Frank stepped forward, his voice tight. "Major, with respect, the boy has never seen combat. He's never faced an enemy. This isn't target practice at the county fair." Cooper's eyes never left James. "I don't need combat experience. I need eyes and a steady hand. Schneider is a trained operative. He won't surrender easily. If he runs, if he takes a hostage, if he tries to fight his way out, I need someone who can make an impossible shot from an impossible distance. If you're watching this and wondering how this moment will change everything, do yourself a favor and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next will prove that courage isn't measured by where you've been, but by what you're willing to do when the moment demands it. James climbed the tower with Major Cooper and one of the MPs following behind. His ankle protested each step, but adrenaline dulled the pain. At the top, he spread out his maps, his calculations, his notebooks filled with trajectory data for every angle of the town. Cooper examined them with growing respect. "You've done this before. Every day for 2 years, sir." James pointed across the darkening landscape. "The general store, 420 yards. The train station, 510. The old mill at the edge of town, 580 yards, accounting for the elevation drop and prevailing wind." The major pulled out binoculars, scanning the streets below. "Schneider is smart. He'll avoid the obvious places. If I were him, I'd hole up somewhere with multiple exits, somewhere people wouldn't think to look." James studied the town with fresh eyes, thinking like prey instead of predator. "The schoolhouse is empty this week. Teacher's sick. It has a basement entrance and a back door leading to the woods." Cooper lowered his binoculars. "Show me." James traced the angles with his finger. 530 yards from here. Clear line of sight. If he makes a run for the woods, there's a gap, maybe 10 seconds where he'd be exposed crossing the field behind the school. 10 seconds at 530 yards in fading light, Cooper said quietly. "That's not a shot, son. That's a prayer." Below, flashlights bobbed as soldiers moved through the streets, methodically checking buildings. The tension was palpable, electric. Somewhere in the darkness, a killer waited. Then it happened. A shout echoed from the schoolhouse direction. Gunfire cracked through the evening air, sharp and violent. James grabbed his grandfather's rifle, his hands moving with practiced precision. He'd loaded it that morning, habit more than expectation. "There," Cooper said, binoculars locked on a figure sprinting across the field behind the school. Dark coat, moving fast toward the tree line. "That's him." James brought the rifle to his shoulder, his breathing instantly controlled, automatic. The world narrowed to the scope, the target, the mathematics of death. Wind southwest at 8 miles per hour. Temperature dropping. Distance 580 yards. Slightly farther than his estimate. Elevation compensation. Lead time for a running target. "He's too far," Frank's voice called from below, having climbed up behind them. "James, you can't make that shot. Nobody can make that shot." But James wasn't listening anymore. His mind had entered that place beyond doubt, beyond fear, where only calculation existed. The figure was running, desperate, 40 yards from the woods and freedom. 30 yards. 20. James exhaled slowly, let his heartbeat settle into the spaces between seconds. He'd practiced this shot 1,000 times in his mind, on paper, across the empty fields of his father's farm. His finger found the trigger. Gentle pressure. Steady. Inevitable. The rifle spoke. The crack of the rifle echoed across Westfield like thunder in a clear sky. For a moment, time suspended itself. The running figure stumbled, then collapsed into the grass 15 yards from the tree line. The soldiers below erupted into motion, sprinting toward the fallen man. James remained frozen at the scope. His breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. He'd done it. 580 yards in fading light with a target moving at full speed. The kind of shot that military snipers trained years to attempt. Major Cooper stood beside him, binoculars raised, watching as his men reached the body. The radio on his belt crackled to life. Target down. Repeat, target down. It's Schneider. Single shot, center mass. He's alive but critical. Cooper lowered the binoculars slowly, turning to look at James with an expression that mixed awe with something deeper, something like understanding. That shot, he said quietly, should have been impossible. James finally lowered the rifle, his hands beginning to shake now that the moment had passed. I've been preparing for 2 years, sir. Every day, every calculation, just in case. Just in case, Cooper repeated, then placed a hand on James's shoulder. Son, I've worked with some of the finest marksmen in the British military. What you just did, in those conditions, with that equipment, most of them couldn't have made that shot. Most wouldn't have even attempted it. Below, the crowd had gathered, watching as medics worked on Schneider. Pastor Gerald looked up at the tower, his expression transformed. Tom and Frank stood together, their faces reflecting something James hadn't seen in 2 years. Respect. The Major's radio crackled again. Sir, he's talking. Says he chose Westfield specifically. Small town, no defenses, easy to disappear. He had intelligence on our POW transport routes. This wasn't random. Cooper's jaw tightened. He'd been planning this. Probably had contacts waiting for him further west. You didn't just stop and escape tonight, James. You stopped whatever operation he had planned. I just did what needed doing, James said, but his voice cracked slightly. What I've been trying to do all along. I know, Cooper said gently. I've seen it before. The ones who couldn't go, who stayed behind and trained anyway, hoping for a chance to prove themselves. Most never get that chance. You did, and you didn't waste it. They descended the tower together. At the bottom, the crowd had grown larger. Sarah stood near the back, her hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her eyes red but clear. My son, she said, her voice breaking. My Thomas. He would have been proud to serve alongside you. I see that now. I'm sorry I couldn't see it before. James didn't know what to say. The words he'd rehearsed for 2 years, all the defenses and explanations, suddenly seemed unnecessary. Frank approached, his one arm extended. I was wrong, he said simply, about everything. 3 years later, the bells of the White Church on Maple Street rang out across Westfield, but this time they celebrated peace. Victory in Europe had come, then victory in the Pacific, and now the boys were coming home for good. The ones who survived, at least. James stood at the base of the bell tower, his limp as pronounced as ever, but the weight he'd carried for so long had finally lifted. Major Cooper's report had changed everything. The British military had documented the shot, the conditions, the distance. Word had spread through military channels, then to the newspapers. The crippled farm boy who made an impossible shot and stopped a German operative became a story people needed to hear. Sarah approached across the churchyard, her smile tentative but genuine. She'd written him letters during those final years of war, apologies and explanations, and slowly rebuilding bridges burned by grief. Robert's death would always hurt, but she'd finally understood that blame couldn't bring him back. You coming to the celebration? She asked. In a bit, James replied. Just wanted a moment up here first. He climbed the tower one more time, but now the town below looked different. The yellow stripe had been painted over with gold leaf, a memorial rather than an insult. The tower itself had been renamed in honor of the night that changed everything. Tom waited at the top, having beaten him there with surprising speed for a one-armed man. He'd opened a shooting range outside town, teaching veterans to find peace through precision and discipline. James helped when he could, sharing the techniques he'd developed during those lonely years of practice. Never thought I'd say this, Tom admitted, looking out over the town, but you were right. About all of it. The preparation, the dedication, the belief that your moment would come. I was desperate, James corrected. Desperate to matter, to contribute, to be something other than the boy who stayed behind. And now I understand that everyone's war is different. Some fight overseas. Some fight here. Some fight battles nobody else can see. Below, the celebration was beginning. Frank had helped organize it, his tremors finally under control after months of treatment. Pastor Gerald moved through the crowd, his congregation whole again in ways that transcended Sunday services. Major Cooper had written from England, his letter arriving 2 weeks prior. The British military wanted to document James's techniques, incorporate them into sniper training programs. They were offering him a position as a consultant, teaching the next generation of marksmen the mathematics of impossible shots. James had accepted, not to prove anything anymore, but because he finally understood his purpose. The tower had never been about hiding or playing soldier. It had been about preparation, about being ready when the moment demanded everything. Sarah called up from below, her voice bright with laughter and life. James, come down. You've spent enough time in towers. It's time to live down here with the rest of us. He smiled, taking one last look at the town that had broken him and rebuilt him stronger. The limp would never heal, but everything else had. Coming, he called back, and began his descent toward a future he'd finally earned. Thank you so much for watching this story until the very end. If this tale of perseverance and redemption touched your heart, please hit that like button and leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel for more incredible true-to-life stories, and let me know in the comments what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support means everything. Until next time, remember that courage shows itself in countless ways, and sometimes the greatest battles are fought in the places we least expect.